We're coming to you live from the IMF headquarters in Washington, D.C., right in the heart of one of the busiest weeks in international finance, where we'll be tackling one of the most important collisions of our time, artificial intelligence and financial systems. Two worlds that are known equally for their complexity as well as their volatility. Let me set the stage with two stories. Story one. Imagine you're sending money overseas. It sounds simple, but cross-border payments are immensely complex as banks run through the gamut of due diligence, including KYC or Know Your Customer, anti-money laundering, AML, sanction screening, among many others. Now, IBM's digital KYC is using generative AI to do the heavy lifting, offloading some of the work that human analysts usually have to do and making their lives much easier, cutting down the time from days to hours. Story number two. Researchers from HKUST and Wharton simulated real market conditions and unleashed trading bots to mimic different kinds of actors in a market setting. Interestingly, the bots started colluding on their own and even punished those that didn't. In human markets, that's usually illegal, but if AI colludes, who is accountable and who do the regulators call to the stand? I'm Tusha Ray, Associate Director and Resident Fellow at the Geotech Center at the Atlantic Council, and I'm joined today by Heba Shams, Amira Karim, and Abhineet Kaul to talk about this and other questions. Heba leads MasterCard's engagement with multilateral organizations, and as part of the role, she also advises the company's leadership on financial inclusion in emerging economies. Amira has a career spanning government, the World Bank, and roles in industry, and she currently leads Amazon's international public policy positioning on payment and financial services. And Abhineet, currently at Access Partnership, has worked on the Asia-Pacific, Latin America, Africa, West Asia, on topics ranging from connectivity and skilling to digital technology and economic development. With that, I'll start with an opening question to all of you. What makes you excited as you think about this emerging intersection of AI and financial services? We can start with Abhineet and then move down the line.
Thank you. Glad to be here. What makes me more excited about this is I believe AI will make finance a lot more inclusive. Imagine you are an SME, you have credit at payout. How can we transform data, which is, we talk about data as an oil, how do we transform data as an asset which could be monetized, right, for companies? So that's obviously the most exciting thing for me. What worries me, there are a lot of stuff. Regulators have excitement and fear. One of the biggest thing for me is the example you gave, model monoculture shocks. We are not 100% certain how models will react or behave in certain situations. So that, to me, is one of the biggest fear which keeps me up at night.
That's a great question. So the thing that excites me really is that I think AI could make finance more human, actually, more adaptive, more resilient, more responsive to the real realities, the lived kind of realities on the ground, right? Whether you are an entrepreneur, whether you are a small and medium enterprise, I think that AI will augment, not replace human judgment, but at the same time also help us create better products and more responsive services for people who are typically underserved. What keeps me up at night really is the idea that AI could compound inequities. And I think we see this possibility or this risk already come to the fore if you look at how some data sets are either monoculture or biased, how models can be sometimes a bit more opaque than they need to be. So we really need to think about deliberately, intentionally, how to safeguard against that. Yeah.
I want to start with what scares me and then jump from that to what really excites me about this. So what scares any mother is anything that may hurt your children, right? I'm a mother of two boys who are teens now. You call them the Gen Zs, and these are, or actually they're borderline between Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and these are considered sort of the AI natives. They are growing up at a time where they will not know the social media and the things that used to scare us, the smartphone only, they will know AI. And the big problem with that, and what scares me the most, is that most of the time they may face situations where they don't know who they were dealing with. They don't know whether the person who's talking to them online is a man or a woman, is real or an AI. And this is what is driving a huge trend in terms of the increase in scams and impersonation and social engineering, and kids that are beginning, like having their first card and joining the digital economy and very curious, and in e-commerce, they're exposed to a lot of that, and we cannot protect them and control them. What really excites me is that it's not that just the scammers are using AI. Companies like MasterCard and like many other companies in this ecosystem are fighting really hard, and they are creating tools that will protect the most vulnerable. For example, at MasterCard, you would know MasterCard is investing heavily in its scam protection and cybersecurity capacity, and others are doing the same, and that excites me. It also excites me, and I echo what my colleague just said. It excites me that now we used to have to wait for decades to build a profile so that we can apply for a loan. Now our children are able to access financial services that we could not have access, and that is because of AI. AI is making it less costly for companies to build profiles about young consumers and beginner consumers, and allow them to access more services than any of us would have dreamt of accessing without 10 years in the professional life. And so I'm excited, but I'm cautious.
And Heba, you brought up a very important point of essentially it's a battle of AI versus AI, where you have, of course, bad actors increasingly deploying these tools and methods, but also companies who are fighting back with their own innovative methods. So a great point there. Amira, you mentioned that AI helps with the personalization of financial products, essentially helping meet people where they are in their lived realities. So how can AI-driven payments empower MSMEs, gig workers in these emerging markets?
That's a really great question. So maybe we should unpack what we mean by AI before we kind of delve deeper into it, right? AI, as we know it, is a general purpose technology that can be applied to many different kinds of financial services, whether it is payments or credit or anything else in between. And if you look at the application of AI right now, I think we are beginning to see some really great use cases of predictive analytics, of generative AI being applied for recommendations or to build macroeconomic compliance signals, but also at the product level, really begin to interface with what humans need on the ground. At the same time, I think that we need to start thinking about how those use cases are not yet mature or durable. And we are in the experimentation phase. We're still exploring. And at Amazon, we really encourage experimentation and piloting. And so as a retailer, we're looking at ways to personalize the customer journey while also utilizing AI to support the multitude of sellers that are on our marketplace to really be empowered to use AI tooling. And so we're developing some of that infrastructure as well as the supporting mechanisms to educate people so that they understand what this general purpose technology can do and how they can do it themselves. It's really not just about developing a one-stop tool. It's really about giving them or democratizing access to artificial intelligence. So that's what we're trying to do. And the way that we see it intersecting with development, and since we're here at the World Bank IMF annual meetings, is really that I think we need to go deeper than metrics that have to do with access. I think we have looked at volume and transactions and access to things like bank accounts. How can we as industry and the public sector collaborate to develop qualitative measurements for agency? AI gives agency and democratizes access to technology for SMEs, for entrepreneurs at the ground level, at the very underserved level. How can we use that to track what they do? how they behave differently, how the markets then respond to their needs differently, and how can we then create safeguards that meet that new level of ability and capabilities. So that's what we're trying to do. Yeah.
And maybe, Trisha, if I can add a stat to it. Now, currently, you are talking about, IMF report says, just in emerging countries, you are talking about $5.7 trillion of funding gap. That's massive. Like, if it was a country on its own, it would be the third largest country in the world. And if you add the informal sector on top of it, you are talking about more than the GDP of India plus Germany combined, the third and the fourth largest countries in the world. That's massive. AI can obviously make, there's a lot of use cases if it can make some way, as Heba said, make 3-line credits, for example. It's much simpler, much smaller assets, and you don't really need to have a lot of collaterals for you to actually get access to credits. Great. The speed of getting transactions, that's again great. So as long as we are talking about faster credit, fairer credit, and actually helping SMEs, gig workers, and all these enterprises to grow, that will always be great.
Right. Yes, important enabling role there. Heba, on a related note, how do global companies like MasterCard design their products in a way that accounts for local realities that people live in? And you can talk about, of course, the different legal compliance requirements that you have to meet, but also how people actually use your products.
Definitely. I mean, the one barrier to adoption of digital payments, digital financial services in general, that is probably less talked about when we discuss, why so many people are still not engaged with the digital economy, with the digital financial services sector. One barrier is the relevance barrier. So if I, as a global company, create a service that is not relevant, that doesn't address a pain point, that doesn't solve a local problem, the punishment comes very fast. The customer will not use the service. Customers now have choice, and at MasterCard we think consumer choice and customer choice is top priority, and that's something that needs to be protected. And unfortunately, very often we encounter policy approaches, very well-meaning policy approaches that eventually ends up constraining consumer choice rather than expanding it. But consumer punishment comes very fast. They leave the service, and they also, in the current situation, they may end up rejecting digitalization altogether and getting off the digital ramps. The challenge with that, and the theme of our conversation is AI, is that the infrastructure of AI is data. So when consumers avoid the digital service and opt for maybe using cash instead, what we lose is not only the transaction, what we lose is the data insights that come from using the digital tools and the digital instrument. So the relevance piece means that a company like MasterCard would never have survived and thrived as long as it has, and in all the countries around the world that we operate in, without making sure that it is very relevant, that it is solving local problems. How do we do that? We do that a lot through partnerships, through investing in local players. I want to speak about a particular partnership in Africa with MTN, where this partnership allowed two very powerful digital financial service providers to come together and solve pain points and increase the ecosystem to which their customers have access to. So MasterCards provide a digital card that works with the Momo wallet, and that digital virtual card provides Momo customers with access to the millions of acceptance points where they can use their card, including cross-border payments, and also allows merchants, local merchants, to be able to access cross-border financial services. So it's local partnerships, it's investment in local innovators are big instruments of localizing products and services and becoming relevant to local consumers. And to the SME question, you'd also be, I'm focusing on Africa because we are at the World Bank IMF annual meetings, and Africa is a very important conversation that in any conversations about development and and global economy and resilience, because essentially this is where the future is going to be. I mean, Africa is going to add 800 million new customers in the coming decade. So, in Africa, we also solve problems for local SMEs by partnering, like the MADE Alliance, which targets local farmers and local SMEs and give them tools that work in a low connectivity environment. 50% of people in Africa are still not connected. So you need tools that can work online and offline, and that's what collaborations and alliances like the MADE Alliance allows us to do. So it's, I would say the top line is partnerships and local investment to capture the insights and the local innovation and serve clients with relevant services that they want actually to use.
Right, yeah, they say that digitalization is a rising tide that lifts all boats, and these kinds of partnerships are important to make sure that happens equitably. As we're talking about operating across borders, I have another question to all of you. Do we need specific standards or safeguards to govern how AI operates across these different national financial ecosystems? We can start with Abhineet.
Simply yes. There are a lot of stuff which is not happening today, which is, especially with the advent of AI in finance. Explainability logs, for example, we don't have a template as to how to ensure that there are, the models are explainable. That's number one. Portability rules, for example, how do I port from one AI LLM to another AI LLM? So all those rules, those schemas, those data quality, the schemas of how we want to ensure that the systems talk to each other, I don't think we have addressed that yet. Technology, yes, we do have the technology, we have the intention, we do have standards, but I think the standards don't really talk to each other across the entire layer of payment.
I think as we think about designing standards, we also have to be very intentional about ensuring that they promote convergence rather than fragmentation. I think that one thing that stands out to me as we talk about AI in finance is that the goal shouldn't be to regulate AI as a standalone general purpose technology. It should be about aligning the use of AI with existing financial sector norms. And there are many norms out there that govern different verticals within finance, in payments, in credit, in a whole range of other things. So we should promote alignment. And we're already seeing some really good building blocks come to the fore that are less implemented top-down, but more developed on a grassroots basis. So there are standards related to identity that are ensuring that data structures remain consistent across jurisdictions. We're also looking at the development of attestation frameworks that are really, kind of creating an opportunity or pathway for a lot of data to be validated across different models. We're also seeing, federated learning models that are becoming more and more sophisticated, that galvanize from different data sources, but allow for, centralized or decentralization of analysis. We're also seeing, and I think this is very encouraging, across industry also, the development of specifications and protocols. And that to me is how governance innovation is keeping pace with technology innovation. You're seeing Stripe and a lot of other players, MasterCard, kind of really developing standards that help industry coalesce. So explainability, auditability, comparability across borders are being baked into those tools. And I think at some point we will see a convergence on how those standards are being used. So it's really encouraging to see all of these dynamic developments, take shape. For us at Amazon, I think what's really important is to listen to the ground and be responsive to individual needs of each financial sector. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of approach. And I think that we need to be very intentional about encouraging that convergence, working with partners like MasterCard, with other thoughtful players to ensure that the voice of the customer, the voice of the citizen continues to be expressed in how we build those standards. Yeah.
I think, it's a tricky space. Do you rush to regulate because the risk is high, or do you wait and see? It's tricky, but I would say this. AI is new somewhat, but it is not a complete departure from development that have been in the making for a long time. Like what I said in my previous response, so it is built on data. Ultimately, it is taking data and data insights and data analysis, data science to the next level. So all the frameworks that have evolved in the past decade or so around data governance still apply. And what we need to do is to make sure first that these data standards and data rules do not hinder the interoperability of AI governance across countries, and also see in which way is AI challenging what we know about data governance and adapt the existing data privacy and data governance rules that we have to this end. Also, we need to remember that the way data governance rules emerged, they emerged initially through industry self-regulation and industry taking up the idea of adopting principles and implementing them. And in this case, industry is motivated by the customer demand, because again, punishment comes fast. The data management is directly linked to trust, and trust is, with current environment, with a lot of consumer choice, trust, when you lose the trust of the customer, the customer moves to the other provider. So for example, MasterCard in 2019 issued its data privacy principles. Its base data responsibility principles are based on the customer and that owns the data, controls the data, benefits from the data, and our job is to keep it safe and protect the data. So very basic framework, but it runs across the entire life cycle of a product in the company. Everybody's it's the job of everybody. It's not one team enforcing data responsibility and data privacy principles. It's everyone in the company. So same thing applies to AI, and the industry is moving forward and putting forward a lot of principles in that regard. Also, we need to acknowledge what the outcome of the UNGA 80, where they put together two mechanisms to fill this gap about AI governance. They put two mechanisms. One is a global dialogue on AI, and one is the technical panel. The one thing I would say is that while this is an incredibly important move, because it brings into the conversation 118 countries that were left out from all AI frameworks, global frameworks that we have. But one thing that we want to stress is that it is important that this becomes a multi-stakeholder dialogue, not just an interstate dialogue. We need industry, civil society, citizen organizations, consumer organizations like Consumer International, which just issued a report on what's the future of digital, or what's the future of consumer protection in digital financial services. Like voices like that, empowered and informed, need to all come together, and the dialogue need to go beyond an international dialogue to a multi-stakeholder dialogue. And we have models for that. It's not new.
Yes, we don't often think of these broader AI governance conversations like the ones happening at the UN as something that have these specific sectoral impacts. Actually carrying on from what Heba has started as a conversation, I was wondering if both of you have some wish lists for these processes as well, maybe 1 or 2 points.
Okay. I would say I think a lot of the conversation, again, I think the fact that AI is still seen as one big entity, but as AI goes more sectoral, AI has to become at least AI governance has to be a lot more modular. You are not recreating the wheels, you are just adding on top of what has already been talked about. If you read any of the AI policy, rule book, guidebook for finance, none of them talk about privacy. Why? Because privacy is already baked into how we have defined our financial ecosystem today. So you don't really recreate the wheel, you are talking about what is additive on top of it. So first and foremost, I would love to see how AI governance becomes a lot more modular, right? The second thing, which I think is two forces clashing with each other. AI governance, as Heba said, while is commendable, we are talking about a top-down approach to AI governance. AI governance today is at least a lot more bottom-up, whereas financial is a lot more top-down. So we're talking about two competing forces coming together. So it's going to be a very interesting way to say how those evolve to define this. And to me, I think the role of private sector is very crucial, to define these technical standards, come up with these things and say, this is what's working. This is what's working for identity. This is what's working for attestation. This is for receipts. This is how we want to ensure that the industry is moving ahead. So I think I would maybe say that thing. And the other important thing is the measurable aspect of it. I don't think we are measuring the impact of AI. We are measuring the impact of payment, sure, but what is AI doing on top of it? Does AI improve your approval rate parity, for example, right? Does it make an AI-aided credit is more inclusive as compared to a traditional credit, for example? We are not tracking it. So unless we track it, it can't be measurable. It won't. Nobody will be accountable. So I think those are two things I would say are crucial.
Yeah, to build on what my colleagues have said, I think that it's important for us to go back to first principles and to really look at how AI is shaping the new financial sector and exactly how we need to govern AI, from an ethical perspective, from a fairness perspective, but also aligning it with existing norms that already exist, that we're not recreating the wheel and risking any duplication, right? So I see a lot of governments coming up with key principles. The Monetary Authority of Singapore is one good example of coming up with some high-level key principles that have been really good about understanding that we're still at an initial stage in applying AI. The other thing that I hope governments and the private sector can do a lot more of is piloting together, working together to solve some of the toughest questions, the more underserved communities, and really trying to iterate what those principles should be and how we can collaborate on creating them together. The last thing is, going back to how AI is general purpose technology and is very much infrastructure driven, how then can we translate that infrastructure availability into agency across the board? How can we work together to promote more democratization of AI across different segments that are either excluded, underserved, or may have an educational gap? At the end of the day, it's also about ensuring that customers, small merchants, entrepreneurs understand what AI is doing for them, right? Why am I getting this new credit availability? How am I going to maintain my data privacy? What is portability in the first place? I think that when we talk about explainability in abstract, we don't do significant or sufficient justice. We need to really explain it to the level of the citizen and the customer. And I think that's where all of us can play a really important role. Yeah.
The point on having data in the sense of data to be able to measure the impact of the tools that we're using has been brought up a few times. And so how can the public sector and multilateral institutions like IMF and the World Bank help set a global baseline to understand the impact of AI tools and integrations in financial systems? We can go in reverse order this time.
I think, there is a lot of work that still needs to be done to set standards on data collection. It's not easy. It's been. We're sitting at the IMF. It is an organization about standardization of data across countries so that they can ensure the stability of the economy, monitor for threats and so on. So it is not easy, and we also should not forget that at the end of the day, data is always local. So you can create good standards globally. Of course, organizations like the World Bank and the IMF play a big role in terms of training government officials on collecting data and making data available, but it's a resource question, and that's where I think one of the biggest barriers to governments' ability to collect data is that still the most of the transactions with governments around the world are still manual, using papers and pens and pencils, and that's the main thing that faces government when they try to get more insight into the operation of the economy or to digitize government operations, is how to transfer all these documents and data sources into the digital format. So I think it will take me back to the idea that maybe one of the biggest things that organizations like the IMF and the World Bank are doing right now is directing more attention to digital development the IMF was just created, the World Bank just created a whole vice presidency dedicated to digital development. So we're seeing things going in the right direction. And as soon as you move into digitization of government to citizen interaction, in a way, data gathering becomes easier. But of course, data quality will still remain something that requires standard setting and also requires government capacity building. And there is a huge space for collaboration, again, to what my colleague just said, Amira. It is something that private sector, academia, civil society, and others can contribute to.
I guess just two things to build on your points. I think partnership and stewardship. I think the multilateral organizations have done a really great job of, kind of building data awareness and also governance measures in developing countries. Now it's really about kind of developing mental models that encourage partnerships within the public sector themselves, as well as with the private sector. How can we optimize the utilization in a very consensual basis so that we can develop tools that are appropriate and relevant for that jurisdiction, right, that country. And then also, stewardship. How can we elevate existing models of data privacy, data protection, to also then incorporate the nuances of AI? And that doesn't have to come in the form of regulation right away because we're still in the initial stages. But how can we study it together so that we can, distribute the responsibility of stewardship across multiple different organizations that have a role to play, and doing so by experimentation and co-development.
I just add to what they have said. Obviously, great points. The fact that compliance is obviously the architecture. People will not capture data if it's not part of the process. And that creates a problem, especially from an inclusion perspective. If we are not coding inclusion into the objectives of what we are trying to do with AI, the model will obviously, optimize for exclusion. That's the way the model will work. So it has to be baked into the practices, the guidance. I think Amira talked about the FEED principles from Singapore, MAS. Great principles. I think that's how we have to start looking at it from the perspective and make it compulsory in some way to get companies and governments to track the right data, which is then, I think, becomes part of the whole process. We don't need to standardize the models. We, in a way, have to standardize the standards as well as the trust, which we have to build on top of it.
Thank you all for such a great conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground in 30 minutes and many layers of this entire collision, as I put it in the introduction as well. Thank you so much for your time. Tune in at 1 o'clock for our next session on navigating global pressures, Morocco's economic outlook with Nadia Feta. Thank you for joining us.